Okay, we're back with Thomas Taylor on Aristotle's philosophy. This is on his doctrine of the soul, and it's drawn primarily from Thomas Taylor's own introduction to his translation of Aristotle's De Anima. So we've looked at the different aspects of the rational soul, irrational soul, vegetative soul, and placed the fantasy in there, which will end up being superior to sense but inferior to opinion. So we'll keep going. In the next place, let us speak concerning the irrational and vegetative souls, for that these are inseparable from the body is evident from the above mentioned rule. For if we can demonstrate that they have no energy separate from body, there is every necessity that they should be themselves inseparable from body. All the energies, therefore, of these souls are in and about the body. For the nutritive, the augmentative, and the generative powers are in body, energized through, and are conversant with the body. Sure. Farther still, this is also the case with anger and desire. Not as intuitively obvious, but we'll see what the argument is. For the former moves the blood, which is about the heart, and the latter thus disposes the liver, i.e., excites it as the instrument of desire. Okay. So this is a specific kind of desire. There's intellectual desire, which obviously is not bodily, and then desires relating to nutrition and growth. But then the desire discussed here is more of the spirited emotion, thumotic kind of will. But here, that's treated basically as a bodily function, which is pretty interesting. And then same with anger. Anger is basically reduced to blood moving about the heart. So it's a physiological condition. And his argument is that there's no energy of these faculties separate from body. So that does seem like a reductionist position on anger and desire. They essentially reduce to bodily states, which is not something you'd expect to hear from a Platonist. But hence they are in body and energized through the body and are also conversant with the body. For desire is now maybe this doesn't entail that like every aspect of the energy is bodily. It's simply being claimed that no energy of these faculties occurs absent the body. So you could still have aspects of desire or anger that are incorporeal, but they aren't separable. Just like the physical reason principles in natural bodies are not separable, but they are incorporeal because they structure body, they're prior to body. So, so I think reduction is too strong an interpretation, and he's probably just saying that they never energize without the body. They're always correlated with these particular bodily conditions. And I'm sure that that's true if you measured someone in an fMRI or whatever. There's always going to be some, or an MRI machine. There's going to be some physiological change when they feel these kinds of anger or desire. I wonder, though, if the same can be said even of more abstract intellectual desires. Like if in your mind you have a vague desire to contemplate some argument or mathematical structure or something, and you're laying there in the machine, will they know? Will there always be some physical activity that they can trace? Probably, but it'll be a more subtle one, presumably, than anger or desire. All right, hence they are in the body and energized through the body and are also conversant with the body. For desire is the appetite either of food or colors, or in short, corporeal things. Yeah, it's interesting then that desire is said explicitly of food here, and it's related to the irrational kind of middle faculties rather than the vegetative faculties, because you would think like desire for nutrition is common to plants as well, so that would be in the vegetative soul. But okay. Desire is the appetite either of food or colors, or in short, corporeal things, and anger is wholly intent on avenging incidental molestations. Okay. I don't know how that avenging incidental molestations entails the body. Hence, if the energies of these are not without the body, this also must necessarily be true of their essences. For if separated, about what would they energize? What would they nourish, or increase, or generate? What incidental molestation would anger avenge? Or what pleasurable objects would excite the appetite of desire? Right. Well, I mean, physical color, you wouldn't have a desire to perceive physical beauty, but you would think still a soul could have some kind of will towards some intellectual beauty. But that's not the kind of desire being discussed. The point about anger is interesting. It's like the same reason that we don't have a distinction between uh, rational deliberation and will until the level of corporeally invested soul. Because above that, there aren't evils. And so, will and deliberation, like we always will the good, and deliberation is making the choice of the good, those are non different above a certain level of soul because there aren't any bad options. Sin enters the world with a certain fall of soul. And so, here, for by a similar reasoning, we don't have anger, which is a response to incidental molestation, until we are in a condition susceptible of corruption and grievance. So, and because that only happens with corporeally invested soul, therefore anger is restricted to soul, just like rational deliberation, as distinct from willing the good, only occurs at the level of corporeally invested soul. Okay. If separate, therefore, they would be in vain. But if it is impossible that any being should exist in vain, the essence from which such energies proceed is inseparable from body. The vegetative soul, however, is inseparable from this gross body, and is corrupted together with it, and its powers, after the departure of the rational soul, remain for a short time in this body. Since whence does the putrid and easily dissoluble increase arise? So that's interesting. As the body decomposes and it expands, he argues that we would need that augmentative faculty to govern that process, as if it was, the soul structuring the body as a whole, which led to its increase, rather than, say, the souls of all the various microorganisms that are actually leading the process. But okay. For in dead bodies, the nails and hairs are increased. But if there is evidently a vestige of the augmentative power after death in the body, it is also necessary that there should be a vestige of the nutritive power, since nutriment is for the sake of increase. So I think this is a bad argument. I wonder if it's one that he finds in any ancient document, or this is just Taylor extrapolating. Hence, therefore, it is evident that these powers have their existence in this body, and if these powers, it is also necessary that this should be the case with the generative power. Mm-hmm. All right. For it is of the same coordination, because where the former are, there the generative power is necessarily seen to be. The irrational soul, however, no longer has an existence in the dead body, for after the departure of the soul from this gross body, the vehicle and subject containing the pneumatic body remain, which also is itself composed from the four elements, but from the predominance of air in it is said to be aerial, just as this gross body, from the predominance of earth in it, is said to be terrestrial. Okay, so vegetative powers inherent in the gross body, in which earth predominates, and then the irrational powers of anger and desire are in the pneumatic vehicle, which Taylor says here, and I think this is the first time we're hearing this, the pneumatic body is composed of all four elements, but it predominates with air. That's why it's called pneumatic, pneuma. So, although that would have followed from the principle that all is in each, but according to each. So, alright. Whence, however, is it evident that the irrational life has its being in this vehicle? Right, so he just claimed the irrational soul is in the pneumatic vehicle, but he didn't really give an argument for it, so here's the argument. Or rather, whence, in short, is it manifest that there is a pneumatic body? So prior to that question of why the irrational soul is vested in it, first we have to address the question of, is there a pneumatic body at all? For it is proper in the first place to investigate whether there is such a body, and afterwards to show that the irrational life subsists in this. It is acknowledged then, or rather demonstrated, that our soul, after its departure from this body, passes into an invisible state, called Hades, and there suffers the punishment of its evil deeds in the present life. Okay, so the argument starts with this point, that the soul goes somewhere for punishment. So I guess the argument will be something like, similar to that same point I made before, that soul not invested in body won't have sin, so therefore to suffer punishment for evil you have to be in a corporeally invested state. And so when we go to Hades, what is it that suffers the punishments? It can't be the soul itself. It'll have to be the body. I think Iamblichus said this somewhere before that we read. Probably in Iamblichus on the soul. For providence not only pays attention to our being, but also to our well-being. Hence the soul is not neglected when it falls into a preternatural state of existence, but participates of a providential attention adapted to its condition. Since also its errors arise from the sweetness attending the gratification of desire, its purification must from necessity be effected through pain, the contrary of pleasure. For in the present life also contraries are the remedies of contraries. On this account the soul which is purified in the places of judgment under the earth suffers pain through punishment. If, however, the soul is incorporeal, it is impossible that it should suffer. Right, so the same argument that I was guessing. How, therefore, is it punished? We reply, it is perfectly necessary for this purpose that a certain body should be suspended from it, which body, when it is immoderately dissolved or congealed by excessive heat or cold, pains the soul from sympathy. So that pneumatic body can suffer similar degradations as the gross body, being dissolved or congealed, made hot or cold. Sorry about the coughing. So it can suffer those things, and then through sympathy with it, the soul can energize in a way that renders those pains present with it. Not, of course, per Plotinus and his impassibility of soul, not by a transfer of feelings from the pneumatic vehicle to the soul, but instead the soul actively energizes in a way that images the pain that the body feels. Okay. just as in the present life, when this outward body suffers, the soul is pained in consequence of the physical bond and the sympathy arising from it, since that which is itself by itself incorporeal cannot suffer anything. What kind of body, therefore, is this which is suspended from the soul? It evidently is not this gross outward body, for this is resolved into the elements from which it is composed. But it is that which we call the pneumatic body. And then there's a long footnote. Footnote 2. The spirit, says Proclus on the Timaeus, page 311. So, ironically, we might actually get to that reading. Interesting. The spirit, says Proclus on the Timaeus, comprehends the summits, as in we might get to that reading today if we read fast enough in the Timaeus. So the spirit comprehends the summits of the irrational life, and these, together with the vehicle, i.e. the ethereal vehicle of the soul, have a perpetual subsistence as being produced by the demiurge himself. Okay, so the spirit comprehends the summits of the irrational life. So the whole irrational soul then is not treated by Proclus seemingly as spirit. The spirit is the summit of irrational soul, and these, the summits of irrational life, together with the vehicle, i.e. the ethereal vehicle of the soul, have a perpetual subsistence as being produced by the demiurge himself. Okay, so the higher anger and desire and the ethereal vehicle are created corporeal by the demiurge himself, but he doesn't create the other corporeal aspects of our being, although he does, of course, create what is above that, the soul. But these summits, becoming extended and divided, produce the life which the junior gods are said by Plato to weave, and which is mortal, because it is necessary that the soul should divest herself of this distributed life when, through purification, she returns to her pristine state of felicity. Okay, let's go back a little bit. So the spirit comprehends the summits of the irrational life, and those with the vehicle have a perpetual subsistence as being produced by the demiurge himself. And it's said in the text of the Timaeus that the demiurge can't create things that degrade of their own accord. He has lesser demiurgic agencies create those gross things which do decay. But these summits of irrational life, becoming extended and divided, produce the life which the junior gods are said by Plato to weave, and which is mortal, because it is necessary that the soul should divest herself of this distributed life when, through purification, she returns to her pristine state of felicity. Okay, so specifically those aspects of life that have to do with the summits of presumably anger and desire, those are the lives that the gods weave, the junior gods weave together. So junior gods being, of course, the planets, and the planets indicate astrological influences, and so the extrapolation here would be that astrological influences particularly affect the summits of the irrational life, meaning the more elevated desires, the more elevated forms of anger. And that's pretty well in line with what we typically think of as astrological influence, and then also the way that, say, the gods influence the heroes in the Iliad. Like, when the gods influence them, it is by, like, inspiring their thumos, spirited energy, or fostering a desire, like, of, in the Odyssey of Odysseus, to return to Penelope, or that sort of thing. So that all tracks. Okay. This distributed life, however, has a more extended existence than the life of this gross body. And on this account, the soul has a life of this kind, when making choice of lives in Hades. And by extended there, I assume he means rarefied, because the pneumatic vehicle, being predominantly air, is less dense than the gross body. So this distributed life, it's not absolute incorporeity, but it's closer to it, and it's in that kind of condition that we are when we were judged in Hades. For by verging to a subordinate condition of being, she receives this mortal life from the junior gods. If this be the case, the demiurge gives subsistence to the summits of the irrational life, but does not produce the irrational life itself. Since, giving subsistence to daimons, he also produces the irrational life which is in them, yet not that which the junior gods weave in us, for this latter is alone adapted to souls falling into generation. Okay, so the demiurge creates the principles of irrational life, the summits of irrational life in us. The junior gods weave them together into a particular fabric of anger, desire, vengeance, presumably, in the drama of human life. And then the irrational life in daimons is basically equivalent to the summits of irrational life in us, and so the junior gods don't weave together the drama of daimonical existence. I assume by daimon he means a level of soul which is, in fact, exempt from sin. So the irrational life probably shouldn't even properly be termed irrational, but the demiurge creates the whole irrational life of daimons. He only creates the summit of irrational life for us. The gods, therefore, that is, the mundane gods, also illuminate their vehicles with rational formed lives, they themselves having intellectual souls. But those daimons, who are peculiarly distinguished by reason, use irrational powers, but keep them in subjection to reason. So those daimons do actually have irrational souls, but they are perfectly subordinated to their reason. Much more, therefore, have our souls a life in the ethereal vehicle, which is irrational, when compared with that of daimons, but is more copious by assuming another irrational life, which is a degeneration of the life in the spirit, which degeneration is woven by the junior gods. Okay, so yeah, this is pretty interesting. Much more, therefore, have our souls a life in the ethereal vehicle, which is irrational, when compared to that of daimons, but is more copious. So, because daimons are higher, they are less corporeally invested. So our ethereal vehicle is, we're even more attached to our ethereal vehicle than the daimons are to theirs. The daimons' ethereal vehicles have irrational faculties that are totally subordinated to reason. We have irrational faculties of our ethereal vehicles, but they're more copious. The bodily nature of the ethereal vehicle is greater, it's more corporeal than for daimons, and by assuming another irrational life, which is a degeneration of the life in the spirit, which degeneration is woven by the junior gods. So mortals have not only the summits of the irrational life, which the daimons have as well, and they have in their ethereal vehicles. We have the summits of the irrational life, and then also the rest of the irrational life, which is a degeneration from it, from those principles, and that degeneration of those orectic and volitional or anger. What's a good adjective for anger related? Angry, I guess. Angry faculties. Those elements are woven by the junior gods, influenced in this kind of drama of human life by astrological things. So the whole, therefore, of that life is immortal, which the soul possesses in imitation of wholes. But the additional life pertains to the secondary and mortal life. Okay. So the whole, interesting. I'm not exactly sure what this sentence is adding on to. Is it the whole of the irrational life is immortal, but the additional life pertains to the secondary and mortal life? So I think, yeah, the wholeness of the irrational faculty would be the collection of all the summits that were discussed previously. So that's the same as what the daimons have. They have a whole irrational faculty, whereas we have partial and degenerated irrational aspects, which themselves are peculiar to mortal life, the daimons not being mortal themselves. If, therefore, in the ethereal vehicle there is one impassive sense, this generates in the pneumatic vehicle one passive sense. Okay, interesting. So it seems like the distinction then is the ethereal vehicle contains those summits of the irrational life that the daimons have, but the pneumatic vehicle, which is more copious or bulky than the ethereal. So ethereal at the top, then pneumatic, and then grows at the bottom. There's probably other layers of vehicle that we could isolate, but the ethereal is basically uncorrupted summits of anger and desire, and then the pneumatic vehicle has the degenerated angers and desires that are subject to astrological influence. So the ethereal vehicle has an impassive sense, but then the pneumatic vehicle has a passive sense, because it's passive to at least the influences of the younger gods, weaving events together. And this one passive sense generates in the outward gross body many and passive senses. Interesting. So the passive sense there, I wonder if it could be like the imagination, if we treat it as passive in an alternate sense, or this is the idea, which I think we've seen briefly mentioned before, of the common sense, like the aspect of sense that allows us to compare sight and hearing, because we can bring them all, call them all together in mind. There has to be one kind of common sense underlining the various senses. So in the ethereal vehicle, we have an impassive sense faculty. Pneumatic vehicle, we have one passive sense faculty, perhaps related to the imagination, perhaps not. And then from that degenerate down to the gross body, we have many and passive senses. The erectic power, desiderative power, also in the ethereal vehicle produces many erectic powers in the pneumatic vehicle. So the ethereal vehicle, the summits of anger and desire are united in their will, in what they're desiring. The pneumatic vehicle, there are many desires which have something separable from the outward body and are capable of being disciplined. So those several desires in the pneumatic vehicle are at least separable from the gross body and are more susceptible of discipline than the gross body. And these produce in the outward body ultimate and material powers. Alright, so one overriding desire in the ethereal, the best desire. In the pneumatic, many desiderative powers which are capable of being disciplined. And then ultimate and material powers in the gross body, where there are many, many types of desire that are always in competition. From this remarkable passage, it follows that the first subsistence of the spirit is with the ethereal vehicle of the soul. Okay, so the spirit pneuma is not peculiar to the pneumatic vehicle. The pneumatic vehicle is one level of vehicle. Spirit can be taken as just immediately suspended from soul, from rational soul, that is, rational soul being soul, really strictly speaking. So the summits of the secondary aspect, the irrational aspect of soul, the summits there are the ethereal vehicle, and that's where spirit begins. But we could also call the pneumatic vehicle part of the spirit. But also, in a stricter sense, it seems like spirit refers particularly to those higher aspects, because we said above that there is, when we fall from a life in the spirit, then, I'm not finding the exact quote, but we just saw it. When we fall from a life in the spirit, then we kind of degenerate into many different desires. So spirit seems, strictly speaking, to be related to the summits of irrational life. In a wider sense, though, it can probably extend all the way down to even the degenerate forms of irrational life that mortal souls project. Okay. That it contains in itself the summits of the irrational life. Spirit contains the summits of the irrational life, and that the irrational life, which is in the pneumatic vehicle, is a degeneration from the life in the ethereal vehicle, and is also mortal. So the ethereal vehicle is immortal. That's what the demiurge creates. The pneumatic vehicle is mortal and is woven together by the younger gods. The reader will find much interesting information on this subject by consulting my translation of a part of Synesius on dreams in the History of the Restoration of the Platonic Theology, Volume 2, of his translation of Proclus on Euclid. Okay. Well, interesting quote. Hopefully we get to that today. Otherwise, we'll get to it soon, seems like. So backing up just to the previous sentence before the footnote, it evidently is not this gross outward body, for this is resolved into the elements from which it is composed, but it is that which we call the pneumatic body. Okay. Anger and desire, therefore, are in this body, as in a subject, and are inseparable from it. For if the soul, so again, the distinction would be the summits of anger and desire are in the ethereal body, but anger and desire themselves, as we know them, are in the pneumatic vehicle. For if the soul, immediately on its departure from the present life, was liberated from these passions, it would be entirely purified from generation. Okay. So basically then, the stored up corrupted desires and angers in the pneumatic vehicle are what bind the soul to samsara, which aligns with Eastern thought pretty well. But being liberated from generation and the passions, it would dwell on high and would not be confined in the places of judgment under the earth. For it is impossible that the soul should be liberated from generation which has not purified herself. Yeah, so as long as we're not purified, we're stuck here. For since she is self-motive and voluntarily falls from good, it is necessary, in order that she may be led back to her pristine perfection, that she should herself purify herself, because the fall of the soul is from the soul, so the reversion back to the good has to be from the soul itself. Those subterranean places of judgment, however, are not able to elevate her, but only convert her to herself. So they don't themselves purify the soul, instead by giving pain where once the soul had been attached to pleasures, it leads the soul to turn away from the body. Although that's not entirely in keeping with what Socrates says in the Phaedo, where he says that pleasures and pains are nails which join the soul to the body. So even pains lead to further attachment. But presumably there's a rarefied form of pain affecting the pneumatic vehicle that doesn't have the same bonding effect for this logic to work. But we can keep going. Hence, when she repents of her errors, she becomes purified by her own proper impulse and voluntarily divests herself of that sympathy by which she was voluntarily bound. Okay. And then another even longer footnote. Okay. So, the extremity of all evils, says Synesius, see page 272 of my history above mentioned. So the extremity of all evils consists in not perceiving the present evil, for this belongs to such as have no desire to emerge, but like those whose skin is hardened by disease, for as they are no longer tormented with pain, so neither are they anxious to be cured. Okay? So it's like the twofold ignorance is the worst ignorance, where you think you know, but you don't. So here, the worst evil is to not even desire to alleviate the evil condition. Hence, penitence possesses a peculiar power of re-elevating the soul. For he who endures his present state with sorrow and remorse will meditate his flight, and the will is the greatest part of purgation. Indeed, through the means of this, both our deeds and words extend their hands to assist us in our ascent. But this being taken away, the soul is deprived of every purifying machine, because destitute of ascent, which is the greatest pledge of reconciliation. Okay. So there's ascent as in upward movement, and then ascent as in agreement there. The soul is deprived of every purifying machine because destitute of ascent, which is the greatest pledge of reconciliation. Yeah. So, for he who endures his present state with sorrow and remorse will meditate his flight, and the will is the greatest part of purgation. Okay, so penitence has a power of purgation because we'll meditate on our desire to leave a sinful condition, a bodily condition as well. And then the will is the greatest part of purgation. If you think that like we just turn ourselves either towards the simple and the good or the compound and bad, then the will to either revert or continually proceed outward is the driving factor there. Hence, both here and elsewhere, punishments bring with them the greatest utility to the order of things, while they oppose molestation to delight and banish stupid pleasure from the soul. Misfortunes, too, which are said to happen contrary to our deserts, are of the greatest advantage in extirpating the passions by which we are captivated with externals. So, unjust evils are actually even better for severing those bonds. Again, seemingly not entirely in keeping with what Socrates says in the Phaedo about pains and how they relate the soul to the body. But I guess we can gloss over that, or maybe interpret Socrates in some other sense. We'll have to reevaluate that when we get to the Phaedo again. Okay. And thus the doctrine of a providence is confirmed to the intelligent from the very circumstances which produce diffidence in the ignorant. Right, so people are like, okay, if God good, why bad stuff? Well, the bad stuff helps us to turn away from corporeal invested uh, existence and leads us to want to purify ourselves and leave. Um, so, and of course, we are here by our own will. So it's we who have brought ourselves here, and then the misfortunes, well, we only experience them because we willed to be here, but also they lead us back to a better condition if we follow them. So, that's all good stuff. Continuing the footnote. To the above most excellent citation, the following also may be added as no less admirable from the manuscript commentary of Olympiodorus on the Gorgias of Phaedo. See my translation of that dialogue, page 455. The passage in Plato on which Olympiodorus comments is as follows. So here's the lemma. Quote, Rhadamanthus likewise sees that such a soul, i.e., a soul in which nothing is right in consequence of its having been educated without truth, through power, luxury, and intemperate conduct, is full of inelegance and baseness. On seeing, however, a soul in this condition, he directly sends it into custody with disgrace, whither, when arrived, it will suffer the punishment which it deserves. But it is proper that everyone who is punished, if he is rightly punished by another, should either become better and derive advantage from his punishment, or become an example to others, that others, perceiving his sufferings, may be terrified and made better. Those, however, are benefited and suffer punishment both from gods and men who have been guilty of curable offenses. But at the same time, the advantage which they derive both here and in Hades takes place through torments and pain, for they cannot by any other means be liberated from injustice. But those who have acted unjustly in the extreme have through such crimes become incurable, serve as examples to others. And these no longer derive any advantage as being incurable, but others are benefited on perceiving them suffering through the whole of time, the greatest, most bitter, and most horrid punishments for their guilt being indeed suspended in the prison of Hades as examples, spectacles, and warnings to the unjust men that come thither. Okay, so not all punishment will be healing. Some of it will also be intended to be an example for others, but I think Olympiodorus in that commentary does say that by the whole of time he means they're in Tartarus for one great year or one entire cycle of the cosmos. So it's not actually a perpetuity of torment. Instead, it's when Plato says the whole of time, he means like one entire cosmic cycle. So even then, these are incurable within the current cycle of cosmic existence. So there's still room for a kind of universal salvation and for all punishment ultimately serving a healing function. Or sorry, that was all just the lemma. We didn't even get into Olympiodorus' comment. So his comment on this very important passage, Olympiodorus thus beautifully comments, quote, It is necessary to know that souls which have moderately sinned are punished but for a short time, and afterwards, being purified, ascend. But when I say they ascend, I do not mean locally, but vitally. For Plotinus says that the soul is elevated not with feet, but by life. But souls that have committed the greatest crimes are directly sent to Tartarus, Plato using the words euthos, directly, instead of swiftly, a right line being the shortest of lines which have the same extremities. It is here, however, worthwhile to doubt why Plato says they are always judged and never purified. What then? Is there never any cessation of their punishment? If, however, the soul is always punished and never enjoys good, she is always in vice. But punishment regards some good. It is not proper, therefore, that the soul should always continue in a state contrary to nature. If therefore punishment does not in any respect benefit us, nor bring us to a better condition, it is inflicted in vain. Neither God, however, nor nature does anything in vain. What then are we to understand by the term ever? We reply as follows, quote, there are 7 spheres, that of the moon, that of the sun, that of the other planets, but the inneradic is the 8th sphere. The lunar sphere, therefore, makes a complete revolution more swiftly, for it is accomplished in 30 days. That of the sun is more slow, for it is accomplished in a year. That of Jupiter is still slower, for it is effected in 12 years, and much more that of Saturn, for it is completed in 30 years. The stars, therefore, are not conjoined with each other in their revolutions, except rarely. Thus, for instance, the sphere of Saturn and the sphere of Jupiter are conjoined with each other in their revolutions in 60 years. For if the sphere of Jupiter comes from the same to the same in 12 years, but that of Saturn in 30 years, it is evident that when Jupiter has made 5, Saturn will have made 2 revolutions, for twice 30 is 60. And so likewise, if is 12, wait a second, and so likewise is 12 times 5, so that their revolutions will be conjoined in 60 years. Souls therefore are punished for such like periods, but the 7 planetary spheres conjoin their revolutions with the inneradic sphere through many myriads of years, and this is the period which Plato calls ton ai chronon, forever. Okay. So yes, in that commentary, Olympiodorus will say what I said he says. That it's, when Plato says forever, he means this is actually distinct from the great year. This is, the interval between conjunctions in the orbits of the 7 planets and the fixed stars. Souls, therefore, that have been patricides or matricides, and universally souls of this description, are punished forever, i.e., during this period. Hence, the soul converts herself to herself gradually and again receives an organ on the earth adapted to her desert. It is necessary, therefore, to know that a pneumatic vehicle is suspended from the soul, and that this is punished by becoming either very much heated or refrigerated. It may also be said that certain dreadful objects present themselves to the view, such as the tragedian speaks of, viz., virgins with a bloody aspect, and the like. Bloody virgins present themselves to souls as a punishment. So like the girl from The Ring, I guess, or something. Spooky. It is likewise necessary to know that punishment makes the soul more sane and renders her more adapted to be purified. It's also interesting that the conjunction of the spheres and then souls being let out of Tartarus, I think that's only in Olympiodorus' commentary on the Gorgias that I know of. Maybe it's elsewhere. But in the Disney Hercules movie, all the Titans are let out of Tartarus because of that kind of conjunction of the planets. So they're reading their Olympiodorus, I guess. It is likewise necessary to know that punishment makes the soul more sane and renders her more adapted to be purified. We must not, therefore, think that punishments are a purification itself, for if the soul should be punished without being converted to herself, she would not be purified. When, therefore, she becomes sober and converted to herself as being self-motive, then she is purified, since a physician also purifies a depraved body, but he does not render it strong by his purification. The diseased person, however, recovers his health afterwards by taking care of himself and not acting in a disorderly and irregular manner by the assumption of improper food. So the good doctor sets the stage for the healing of the patient, but the patient heals himself. So the doctor is like applying the punishment, and then the soul reverts itself. So in a similar way, the doctor does something to set the body on the right course, and then the body itself heals itself. And again, as he who comes from health to disease forgets what he did when he was well, but as he recovers, his health again remembers, so the soul coming into the present life forgets the punishments which she formerly endured, and thus acts erroneously. For if she was always conscious of this, she would not sin. This forgetfulness, however, happens to her for a good purpose, for if she remembered and did not err through fear, she would preserve through fear her proper good, and thus would no longer be well conditioned or act like a self-motive nature. Okay. So the purpose of the forgetfulness is to have, in the first place, the rank of self-motive natures, souls that change through time, because if she always remembered everything, she would never deviate from her proper good, and a rank of souls would be missing. In other words, she becomes oblivious, therefore, that she may explore good as being self-motive, since we also love servants and consider them as as of more worth when they serve us voluntarily and not through fear. Oh, I see. So the point was actually slightly different. If if through fear we avoided any sin and always preserved our proper good, we would be like a servant that was coerced into serving, whereas we need to be able to choose our service. So to preserve our free will, we have to be forgetful of some of those lessons, because the power, and this fits with like the Platonic point that all people, all things seek the good necessarily. So if we remembered properly all the lessons, then we would basically be determined never to sin again, and that would deprive us of a certain kind of agency or freedom. But I think the 2 points are actually compatible because, again, like mortal nature's rational deliberation is distinct from what we will, and so it's only at that level that we have freedom. It's only at that level that we have a certain rank of souls. So I think they amount to the same teleological argument that we need the forgetfulness in order to fill out the ranks of souls, and also to have a rank of soul in which free will can be exercised as we know it. Continuing the footnote, so this is Olympiodorus still. Souls, therefore, are punished here, but they appear to be especially purified hereafter, since a life without body, i.e. without this gross body, and even the aerial vehicle, is more adapted to them. So souls can be especially purified when they are minimally invested, so with the ethereal vehicle alone, or pneumatic vehicle alone. If, however, someone should ask why the poor also are not punished, who have the will to act unjustly, but only the powerful, since the poor, if they had instruments subservient to their will, such as wealth and the like, would likewise sin, we reply that the poor also, if they had an unjust will in the present life, are punished, but the measures are different. For he whose injustice extended no farther than to his will is not punished, similarly with him whose will has proceeded into energy, and who has acted unjustly. And lastly, the soul, by suffering, becomes herself amended, and is an example to those that behold her. Okay, so this digression on the purpose of punishment. So people who don't have the resources to sin greatly, but would sin greatly, why not punish them similarly, since the purpose of the punishment is to revert souls back to the good, and that means to turn away from the evil will? Well, he just asserts that actualized injustice ought to be punished more greatly than internalized injustice, and doesn't give a good argument for that. But then the following phrase, and lastly, the soul by suffering becomes herself amended, and is an example to those that behold her. Maybe it has to do with that exemplary aspect that people who have acted unjustly need to be seen to be punished. It's important for the sake of other souls that they're punished to a greater degree so that justice appears to obtain. Other than that, to interpret it more deeply, there might be some way in which energizing unjustly will actually necessitate a different internal condition. So the man who like would be tempted to sin if given the opportunity, but remains in that passive, unactualized state, might be better off internally necessarily than the man who had a similar internal disposition and then acted out the evil. Because once you've acted out the evil, presumably there is some effect on the even like your potent, or I don't know what I'm trying to say, the potentialities you have for good or evil. So acting in an evil way necessarily has some condition on your subjective state as well, or something like that. But we'll just finish this footnote up here. I shall only observe, this is Taylor now, in addition to this admirable extract, that Olympiodorus in his manuscript commentary on the Phaedo of Plato assigns another reason why some souls are said by Plato to be punished eternally, which I think is even superior to that already given. Quote, we must say, he observes, that the incurable soul is punished eternally, calling eternity her life, and the partial period of her existence. For in reality, souls which have offended in the highest degree cannot be sufficiently purified in one period, but are continually in life, as it were, in Tartarus. For this period is called by Plato eternity. I mean, that's the same point, it seems like, but such is the philanthropy of genuine this is Taylor again. Such is the philanthropy of genuine philosophy, which no less harmonizes with our unperverted conceptions than with the goodness of divinity. For to suppose that divinity punishes eternally offending souls that are capable of being reclaimed, and the number of those that are incurable must be small indeed, is to make him a greater tyrant than Caligula or the most execrable potentate that ever disgraced the annals of history. The abject minds that entertain such a dreadful opinion look only to the omnipotence of deity. He's like trying to attack Christians here, actually. But some Christians do accept universal salvation, just a minority of them. Look only to the omnipotence of deity, are ignorant that his attributes are exerted in inseparable conjunction, and that in consequence of this, while irresistible power is the concomitant of his will, the most consummate goodness is blended with all the energies of his power. Okay, so some souls are punished for an entire cosmic cycle, but not forever. Alright. So this is the last time we're going to do this time for Taylor on Aristotle. We'll start doing this periodically through the week to make space for the course that's starting. So, any thoughts on the reading today? Alright. Yep, good stuff. We will be continuing these during the week, so we're not just dropping this, but no more Saturdays. So for those who have attended on Saturdays, thanks for showing up consistently, and hopefully it works out at some point during the week. If not, of course, the streams will be up. So, and you can always leave a comment on the YouTube channel as well. So thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thanks.
So actually, oh shoot, he left. I'm thinking I might want to take a little break before I start Timaeus, just so you know. So it'll be a few minutes. Okay. Alright, see you then. My tongue is fucked up again. It's like this dryness, I think I can't handle it.
Yeah.
And my lip, too, which is even worse.
I wonder if that's what your cough's about, too.
I don't know. We need to use that humidifier, that's for sure. busy, or do you feel like?
I feel like I would if I ever knew what was going on day to day.
Yeah. think we have big room.
Yeah.
Because, like, when everyone's getting dressed, everyone has to go in and out of there.
That's true.
I think usually people like having their clothes where they get changed. Of course, you could, like, have stalls for people to get changed in.
Yeah. Let's explore an alternate world where that's what happened instead. People like having clothes in their like bedroom or whatever.
That it became the norm.
Yeah, what would that be like?
Clothes all remain here.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem as functional.
I think so.
No. Yeah. It seems like autistically appealing. Like, this is the clothes place.
Yeah. This is where it lives.
Uh huh. Satisfying at a certain level, but
I feel like I would be more likely to fold laundry if the place that I put the laundry was right next to where the laundry gets done. But maybe I could just get like one of those portable laundry racks and like fold everything and put it on that, and then later take it to where it goes.
why don't you just dump it all on the bed in the bedroom where you have your dressers and
I
fold it
hate
there?
that
Why?
because the bed is like low key always dirty.
Yeah.
And if you pour clean clothes on them, now they're low key a little dirty.
Alright. You need a laundry table then. So I guess the rack. Okay. We're good now, right? Everyone's good?